I died. And that was comforting. I walked away, looking into the face of the second woman I truly loved, while the dead body of the first lay just a few feet away. Maybe I'll see her soon. I then felt a searing pain in my chest as a jolt of electricity shot through me, hearing a cry of, "Clean up," and I was shocked again. I leaned back as I heard someone say, "We've got rhythm. Great job, team." Then I died again, floating in the sea of peace without pain. And then I was born again. My eyes flickered, and it seemed like an eternity passed before they focused. The first thing I saw was Maddie, and damn, was she crying again. Thinking that I was still lying in the wreckage of the attack, I tried to touch her cheek, but I could not move my hand. I looked down and noticed the straps. "Don't move, darling. Don't move yet. Welcome back. I've missed you terribly, my darling." She stood up, and I noticed that she was leaning on a cane. She saw my expression. "It's okay, honey. The bastards knocked out part of my hip bone. The doctors are going to replace it in a few months. Right now, I'd rather worry about you." Everything came back to me. I jerked against the belts, and all kinds of signals and sirens began to ring. The male nurse stuck a needle into my Roman 4, and I fell asleep again. I woke up again, feeling Tatiana stroking my cheek. When my eyes opened, she jumped back, shouting in an excited voice, "Mom, he's awake." Maddie hurried in, followed by Joseph. This time she didn't cry and kissed me tenderly before stepping back and turning around. "See, kids, I told you he won't leave us. You can hug him if you're careful." Taddy kissed me tenderly on the cheek, whispering, "Welcome back, Daddy." Joseph simply took my hand and held it tightly, tears in his eyes. The doctor came in, followed by 2 nurses. "Welcome back to the world of the living, Major. I'm going to examine you, and when I'm done, you can have dinner with your family. Maybe I'll unplug you from a few machines before I go. If you want, we'll get you up into a sitting position." I really wanted this. I had an uneasy feeling that I had been in this position for quite some time. And why the hell does he call me Major? He tested motor skills, arms and legs, and asked questions, which I answered in a hoarse voice. I had a terribly sore throat. "I'm afraid your vocal cords are a little damaged, sir, but the main reason you sound like that is because of the tube that was in your throat." "How long?" "Oh, a week or 2. Then your voice will be almost normal." "No, doctor. How long have I been unconscious?" He suddenly left, saying that my chief doctor would come soon and explain everything. I looked at Maddie. "How long was I unconscious, dear?" She sent the children away and hesitated before answering. "You were in bad shape, Pete. You were shot through your left lung. There were a few minor punctures throughout your body that had to be treated after the shrapnel was removed. I knew there was more to come. And they had to rebuild your face. The impact when Joe hit you was massive." She paused, collecting her thoughts. "There was no choice, dear. They had to completely reconstruct your face. They did a lot while you were unconscious, but there are still more procedures to be done. You will look like a completely different person when they are done." "Where am I?" A tall man of 40 entered. "You are in Scotland, Major Jones. You were brought here immediately after the incident on orders from the highest levels of government. Some of the best trauma specialists in the world were brought here to treat you. I honestly don't know how you survived. Yours. Your face is almost completely bandaged now, and we should leave the bandages on for a few more days. If I deem you healthy enough, we'll begin your rehabilitation then. You've been immobile for a very long time, sir." He glanced at his tablet. 98 days to be exact. We had to keep you sedated to treat you." 98 days. I tried to get up, and then I realized that I had no strength. He patted my hand. "I'm sorry, but it was necessary. I'll leave it to your wife to tell you everything that happened." He spoke quietly to Maddie on the other side of the room, wished me good night, and left. Taddy and Joseph left with him. 3 days later, as Maddie was reading to me, I stopped her, sighing. "Okay, tell me, how many people have I lost?" She sniffled a little before clearing her throat. I knew then that it would be bad. Well, you know about Joe. I'm so sorry she's gone. Even with what she did to you, she wasn't a bad person. Who else? The names came out of her mouth like physical blows. Teddy, Sherry, all the members of the team I was with. Most of the SAS who were guarding Teddy and the others. Moshe was injured, but fully recovered. Ian and Trevor were injured, but will not be left with any permanent reminders. Jack is very hit when he tries to protect Polly and the child. The child did not receive a single scratch on the shoulder, but Fatima, your mother and ex-mother-in-law, escaped with scratches and bruises from the explosion. Collateral damage: 23 dead, 51 injured, ranging from loss of limbs and vision to minor injuries. I knew she wasn't telling me something. What happened, Maddie? The tears began. Josh died, honey. If it's any consolation, he didn't feel any pain. I fell back on the pillow as if I had been physically struck. My son, is he dead? Tears slowly ran down my cheek as I tried to pull myself together. It didn't help, and when Maddie held me to her chest, I cried like a broken child because that's how I felt. I will never see his sincere smile again when he thought he was deceiving everyone, only to discover that everyone knew because he was a terrible liar. I will never see the children he and Celeste planned to have. They're all gone, and it's my fault. Poor Celeste, how she must hate me now. 3 weeks later, I stood up and walked from the bed to the bathroom, incredibly proud that I could now stand while peeing. Around this time, but I was getting better every day. I'm being discharged next week to the cottage Maddie rented. The children couldn't wait. I sensed their anxiety the first few times we were together and asked Maddie about it when we were alone. They're afraid of you, darling. They're afraid that you'll reject them because of what their mother did. They're afraid that if you reject them, I'll reject them too. Please, please don't make me choose. They're the same to me. Relatives, as if I gave birth to them myself. I am truly lucky, a dear, worn-out scout who has a chance at a normal life, full of children and a man who loves her. I beg you not to take this away from us all. I looked at her for a few seconds while she fidgeted nervously. Kiss me. She was stunned. What? If you love me, kiss me. I was still barely able to move, so she leaned in, about to give me a loving kiss when I bit her lip. She jumped back, rubbing it. Ouch! Why did you do that? Because I don't have the strength to get out of this bed and flog you. You are my woman, understand? Mine. These children love you with all their heart and soul. You can see it in their eyes. They belong to you, it's obvious. And because of this, since you are mine, they are mine too. Not only because of you, but also because I have always been attached to them. They are wonderful children, dear, and I will be proud to call them mine. Maybe it is God, Allah, Buddha, or someone else is giving me a chance to start again. The wife I love, the children I'm proud of, how could this be better? Now I need you to do something. Bring them here and leave us for a few minutes. Alone, please. That little speech wore me out, so I lay back on the pillow about 30 seconds before her lips were on mine. Damn, when will she stop crying? Every time we were together, she ended up in tears. When she recovered, she went to the cottage and brought them. Pushing them into the room, she closed the door. They stood there, clearly scared, and I asked them to sit on the bed with me. They sat down carefully, ready to escape. I took Taddie's hand, motioning Joseph to come closer. Children, I never knew a more worthy man than your father. Strong in body and spirit, he was a man of honor, devoted to his beliefs and friends, and died defending them both. I am sure his last thoughts were of you and yours. Mother. Now I got their attention, it wasn't what they expected. Taddie involuntarily squeezed my hand. Your mother was a good woman, lost and alone, grieving the loss of her husband, with children to provide for in an unstable environment. Sometimes when you are hurting and vulnerable, people can affect you in ways you cannot understand. She was lost for a while, but in the end, her love for you won. She screamed to warn you and ran away so you wouldn't get hurt, even though she knew she would die. so I want you to remember. Their parents are kind and loving people. But they're gone. Part of my family is gone the same way, victims of an undeclared war. What's left is us, you guys, Maddie, me. It will never be the same as it was, but I really think we belong together. I want to hold Maddie's hand one day and point at you, maybe at your college graduation, Joseph, or when I give you away in marriage. Although I don't want that, Taddy, and brag that you are ours, and that you were the best children our parents could have. Will you allow us to achieve our dream? Patty screamed and rushed at me, and even though every nerve cell in my chest was screaming in pain, I hugged her tightly as she sobbed. The scream brought Maddie into the room, and Joseph grabbed her, as if he was afraid that she would disappear if he let her go. Maddie immediately started crying again. The nurse looked in to see what was going on, smiled, and closed the door. It took another 4 days before I was allowed to leave the hospital. Even then, I had 2 follow-up surgeries planned once I was strong enough. They reconstructed most of my face while I was unconscious, and it was a little creepy the first time I was allowed to look in the mirror. They removed all the mirrors from my room, so until that moment I didn't know what I looked like. My cheekbones are higher, my jaw is shorter and more square. The bump on my nose that was left behind when I missed a ball in my youth has disappeared. The strangest thing was that my hair was now white. Doctors said they had heard and seen cases of this happening, and most agreed it was caused by trauma and stress. Maddie was right, even though I didn't recognize myself. Since I didn't have a mirror and my hands were considered too shaky, usually every day a cute volunteer would come over to shave me, flirting and laughing. One morning Maddie walked in and saw this, melting the poor girl with her most dangerous spy look. The next day she came early with a new blade and hot towels. It was an old-fashioned razor, honed to perfection. She lathered me gently and then shaved with short, precise strokes, holding it at the base of my throat for a second. "Mine," she said softly before continuing. I got the message. On the second day at the cottage, while the kids were in class, I asked Maddie what else she was hiding from me. She sighed. "I was going to wait a few days, but if you're ready, I'll tell you everything." I nodded, wanting to know everything. "First of all, the world thought you were dead. Authorities on both sides of the ocean thought it was the best solution. After all, the clip of you walking forward screaming convinced everyone that you couldn't have survived. So you were safe. I know you'll want to see your children, but stop and think. While you're dead, there's no need for anyone to attack your family. You're buried next to Joe in a closed coffin because of your injuries." Damn it. Even alive, I was dead, and although I desperately wanted to see the girls, it would be better to continue being dead, at least for now. Did they give us a proper funeral? You can watch it on the internet. There was a small private ceremony for family and friends, and then it was moved to the university football stadium, where you lay in state for 4 hours. The stadium was full. An estimated 30,000 people came to say goodbye to you. Yours, a friend of the dean, gave your eulogy, and there wasn't a dry eye as he described you as a scholar, a teacher, and a trusted family man. Joe was described as a loving mother and a successful businesswoman, and he burst into tears as he protested the injustice of Josh's life being taken. When he first started to enjoy it, there was a great shot of your children, Jack in full uniform, in a wheelchair, Jess and her husband holding your mother and Marie, and America was furious and demanding action. Wow. Will any celebrities come? The governor and all the local politicians at the state and federal levels. The vice president was present and made a short speech after the ceremony, promising that the full might of the government would be devoted to seeking justice for your deaths. I think he was sincere. Well, it looks like I went out in style. I asked about Teddy. The ceremony was at Westminster Abbey. The Queen was present, sitting with her family. His widow was one of her closest friends. All the royal families of Europe were represented. His many friends filled the place, and they set up loudspeakers and several large screens so people could watch the ceremony. The security outside was incredibly tight. There were literally hundreds in and out of uniform, forming a tight ring around the place, senior members of the consulate and the Secretary of State sent representatives from Turkey, Syria, as well as Kurdish separatists, all in honor of his efforts. Records the history of the region. Wow seems to be my favorite word. What about Sherry? She was taken home and buried in a private ceremony, just family and a few of her closest friends. I went, even in a wheelchair. I need to tell you, dear, her father and brother are two very angry men now. I think there will be a high price to pay for the attack. How badly was Moshe injured? He will have difficulty flying from now on. He has a 3-inch steel plate replacing part of his skull that was destroyed. He has also lost sight in his left eye and is nearly deaf in that ear. But he is doing well and Ruth is taking care of him at all times. He will be a professor again when his wounds are sufficiently healed, teaching ancient Near Eastern studies, and his classes are already in high demand among students. His country has recognized his achievements by awarding him medals and activating his military pension with the rank of colonel. Award ceremony. For the first time, my anger burst out. Damn. Please tell the countries that did something about this. Oh, they did. They imposed a curfew on England and gained the support of most of Europe. They got the names of the shooters, and the 2 remaining terrorists they captured sang like canaries after a little persuasion, the type of persuasion that doesn't survive. The expulsions, arrests, and scandals that rocked 4 governments were the result of the fact that the ability of certain factions to spread chaos was greatly reduced. There was something she didn't say, but I could wait. She knew when the time was right. My days were filled with pain as my dormant muscles awoke. I stuck with it, and as soon as I was able to care for myself and the kids, Maddie had her hip replaced. Then it was her turn to go through the hell of rehab. While I was recovering physically, I experienced bouts of depression and irrational anger. They were aggravated by the tight control I maintained around the children. Under no circumstances did I want them to see me in any unfavorable light. It made everything even worse when I was alone and in danger of exploding. I had a whipping bag hung from a tree in the woods behind our cottage, and I beat him until my hands bled, even under the bandages. I was nowhere near my previous level of skill, but I remembered. An important event of that time was our wedding. As soon as Maddie was able to walk again, we tied the knot at a local church. We slowly assimilated into village life, to the point where we were greeted on the street, invited to tea parties, and shared stories of what the village children, including our 2, had done. Everyone called me Major, and one day in the pub I told them that if I was a major, then Maddie was a general. They started calling her that as a joke until she accepted it. She enjoyed her new life tremendously, immersing herself in normalcy, taking the children to dance classes, both because their father had instilled ballet and classical music in them from birth. This made shy little Joseph a big hit with the girls and led to teasing from the boys. The few examples of martial arts that Maddie and I taught them paid off, and they accepted him for who he was. When it became obvious that the girls liked his dance moves, they even asked him to help them with some tips. Of course, Taddy, who was growing into a very attractive young woman, was brought in to help. She brought a few of her friends, and soon every Saturday was filled with dancing. Parents sometimes came, and we sat at sunset and looked at them, reminiscing. Sometimes, if we'd had a couple of pints, the old folks would get involved too, entertaining the kids. It was during one of our rare, shaky dances when I whispered something in her ear that made her stop and burst into tears. Women, old and young, immediately gathered around her, casting angry glances in my direction until she explained why she was crying. Then the party really began. Everyone thought we were already married, so she told them I just asked her to get married again, a full ceremony at a local church, a chance to renew our vows. Only Maddie, the priest, and I knew it was a real wedding. It was supposed to be a simple ceremony, but the entire village showed up, as well as all the available staff from the hospital. Joseph was my best man and Taddy was my only bridesmaid. The ceremony was simple, but sweet and full of promise. We thought about writing our own vows, but decided that the standard ones would cover everything pretty well. We even went on a short honeymoon to the French coast, enjoying the nightlife. I was hesitant to go to the beach until Maddie pulled me out one afternoon and threw off her robe, revealing the smallest swimsuit I'd ever seen. She was hotter than a lot of young women, even the topless ones, and I told her that and how much I loved her. Prove it. Strip down to your swim trunks. By this time, I was in pretty good shape, but I wasn't particularly attractive in the nude. But I loved my wife, so I took off my sweatpants and took off my shirt. They fixed the scar on my cheek when they remade my face, but my body was a different matter. There were small clusters of scars on my arms, chest, and even on my back where shrapnel had hit me. People tried not to stare, but couldn't help themselves. After an hour, they got used to it, until a young man with even more scars appeared. He walked over smiling and shook our hands while a little red-haired girl stood nearby. First Sergeant Will Grimes, retired. This is Molly, Lieutenant Molly Spencer, active duty. Good to see a fellow warrior. He had a Western accent from the U.S. Major Mark Jones, I said, remaining in character. My language skills eased my British accent, and no one noticed when I sometimes said something without thinking in my native language. My wife, Maddie, is a general in our little army. He smiled and saluted, which made Molly laugh. Soon they were next to us on the sand, Maddie in her almost non-existent swimsuit and Molly in a small thong drawing many glances, but one look at their companions made people stay away. He asked, indirectly, how I got my scars. Bullet in Syria. Scars from improvised explosive devices in another place that I can't reveal. The rest of the bullet holes are from the same place. What about you? An improvised explosive device in Iraq, bullet holes from there and from Afghanistan. And this, he said, pointing to a small scar on his arm, from Molly. She can get really horny at times like this. Molly blushed, screamed, and slapped his arm in playful anger. I turned my back to where 4 identical scratches, still fresh, ran down my back. From last night. I had to get a tetanus shot. Maddie blushed and slapped my arm. Liar, these were from this morning. Molly dear, remember one thing. Old warriors never give up. They just teach your weaknesses and attack from the other side. We got along so well that we took them out to dinner, took them to a really nice place that I suspected they couldn't afford, and made sure they had a good time. When we said goodbye for the night, he handed me a paper with his email and phone number. He lived in England with Molly, who was serving in the British Army and did not want to move when her service ended. I need a job. If you know of anything, let me know. I'd appreciate it. We became so close as a couple that I asked for a favor, and soon Molly was assigned to a local hospital and got a job as a driver for a medical supply company. They were shocked when they met us at the local pub, and I just grinned and remarked on how small the world can be sometimes. Molly jumped into my lap, showering kisses all over my face. Maddie, not wanting to be left out, sat on Will's lap, swaying as she kissed him, then commented that she was glad to see him happy. He blushed as the girls switched places, and Molly thanked Maddie for keeping Will cheerful. They found a small apartment and soon became regular guests in our house. The children loved them and Will surprised them by being a big fan of opera and ballet, in addition to being a classically trained pianist. He often played in the pub and local church when the regular performer was busy or away. I was married to the woman I loved, had children I adored, and was surrounded by good friends. My old family was no longer in danger and could live a normal life without fear. So why wasn't I happy? Will once caught me kicking a bag behind my house. I don't know how long he watched me before he walked over to the bench and wrapped his arms around me. I stood there, breathless with exhaustion, until he began to beat the bag, his face a mask of rage, tears flowing until he could barely raise his arms. I threw him a bottle of water when he finished, and we relaxed, sitting by the trees. It never goes away, does it? Rage and pain. I sighed. No, it doesn't go away. I fight it every day. I play with my kids. I love my wife. But sometimes it just doesn't go away. I know. I relive what happened to me every night, over and over again. Our Humvee flips in the air, throwing us around like rag dolls, until it stops and I crawl out. Barely able to move on my own, I pulled out my two friends and leaned them against the low wall. I was crawling back, trying to help the others, when the RPG hit, exploding it, and I ended up under the rubble, losing almost all the skin on my back, and into the wall, smashing my friends. I died anyway, and with only my gun, I waited until they were close enough to touch them before I started shooting. My men thought I was dead until I tried to raise the weapon high enough to fire again. Shoot, I've been in different hospitals for over a year. Molly has been my nurse for the last 8 months. He paused, tears in his eyes, before continuing. She saved me, Major. By then my body was functional, but my mind was somewhere else. I would still be in a hospital room, sitting in a wheelchair staring at the walls if it weren't for her. Believe it or not, Sergeant, I know that feeling. If it weren't for Maddie, I don't know where I would be. She started saving me before I was last wounded. She had to have my hip replaced because she was there for me. With me. If it weren't for her and my kids, I'd be in a very dark place right now. Damn, you saw me. I'm in that dark place when they're not around. By that time, we were already quite drunk, and our wives came and gently took us home. We lived in the country for almost a year, and although we often talked about moving to California and living in the cottage that Maddie had, I don't think either of us was serious, because we liked the quiet little village, away from the rough weather. The world in which we lived. The children were happy and well-adjusted and grew by leaps and bounds. Joseph decided to go by Joe and was almost as tall as me. Taddy was turning into an amazing woman. It was at a seemingly ordinary birthday party when my mask came off and my rage came out. The party was on the edge of the common area, in a small area reserved for picnics and family gatherings. All the girls were beautiful, but Taddy shone among them in a yellow summer dress, her shiny black hair flowing down her back. Maddie and I had our parents as chaperones, and we brought Will and Molly with us. In honor of the event, both wives wore new dresses. We sat on the sidelines and watched the girls. The boys hung around nearby. Molly commented on how sweet it was to see the boys shyly holding hands, and the older ones sharing hugs. One took Taddy by the hand, and she beamed. I must have had a dark expression on my face because Maddie suddenly kissed me. She's growing up, honey, and we can't stop it. It's all innocent now, and I've had the talk with her, so let her enjoy the moment. Everything went to hell when several older guys burst into the party. Football hooligans is the politest term I could use for them. They came to a local match between their team and ours, and they lost. They seemed to have decided that hitting on the local girls would brighten their day. Maddie frowned as they approached, but remained calm until one of them grabbed the girl. That's enough. This is a private party. You have to leave. Now. What are you going to do, Granny? Call the cops? We're going to have some fun, and then maybe give them back to you. Get out. Maddie smiled sweetly. I don't need cops. I have an army, and I can kick your asses without ruining your hair. Last chance, freaks. They were stunned that the old woman spoke to them like that. Another, trying to prove his point, tried to grab Taddy. She jumped back, but his hand caught the strap and tore her dress off, exposing her budding breasts. The last thing I remember was her screaming, and then Will trying to grab me from behind and almost getting hit in the head for his efforts. Stop, Major. It's over. I shook my head, my rage subsiding. Looking around, I was shocked by the massacre. Maddie took out her opponent in 3 moves. Will dealt with 2, but before he could reach me, I had already dealt with the last 3. Molly stepped aside when the fight broke out and had enough sense to call the cops and an ambulance. There were lengthy explanations for 2 officers and cases for 4 ambulances. When it was all over, the hooligans were released on the condition that none of us would press charges and they would never return to the country. Will and I received stern warnings not to take the law into our own hands, regardless of provocation, and I was visited by the colonel who was my primary physician. He had 3 letters. Read them and report to this address at the appointed time. He didn't say otherwise, but I got his meaning. The first was from the consulate warning me of a breach of cover and requiring me to take an anger management course and PTSD counseling. The earlier the better. One more outbreak and the family will be relocated. The second was a letter from the Pope. Pete, my son, please accept my belated condolences on the loss of your friends and family. Don't be surprised that I knew you were alive. By now you know it's hard to keep secrets from the church. I'm sending an old friend to you, which I think can help you. Please face it with an open mind. I studied your new family while you were in the hospital. They need you as much as you need them. Please don't let them and me down. You will always be my favorite agnostic. The third was from the Grand Mufti of the royal family. I spoke with him several times while we visited his country. Greetings, Pete Trammell. I am glad that Allah was merciful enough to spare your life and allow you to start over. Please do not neglect this gift. Think about your families. The prince and his father are waging their own personal jihad, and I fear that many lives will be lost to satisfy their wrath. I ask you to stay away from this and let your warrior days end. I felt something when we met, something dark, something that would be terrible if released. Embrace your new life, enjoy your new family, for all of us. Allah Akbar. So at the appointed time and place, I found myself in a large office. I almost turned around when I saw that my therapist was a Catholic priest. He saw my expression and grinned. Okay, you've got us. It's nothing more than a cleverly designed plan to lure you into our web. Or maybe it's because some very powerful friends wanted you to have the best. And Major, I'm the best. He was a small man, bald, but he carried himself well and had probably the sharpest mind I have ever met. I saw him for 7 months. Around the 5th month, he looked at me seriously. I think I get it now. You divorced your wife and went on adventures that ultimately led to most of your friends and part of your family dying. It's all your fault and you don't deserve to be happy. Is that about it? I stared in shock at his serious expression before he chuckled. Sounds pretty stupid, doesn't it? We'll never be able to pinpoint exactly why all of this happened. Maybe it started almost 30 years ago when your ex-wife, your best friend, and your father sat down and started planning your life. Or maybe it was when you found out about the betrayal and were shocked by your wife's lack of remorse. Or maybe it was when you met Teddy and Sherry and accepted their offer. Or when your security guy decided, expose you. He paused to make sure I was really listening. In the end, none of this matters. You survived. Your daughters are safe. You have a new family, a woman who loves you, and children who think you are the best. You have friends and a decent, fulfilling life. Maybe you should take up teaching again. You were very good at it. Don't waste this gift in bitterness and regret. I think that's when I started to really heal. My friends in high places fabricated enough background information for me to get my papers, but instead of looking for a college, I taught history at my children's school. It was a bit of an adjustment to go from college students to 12 and 13-year-olds, but I ultimately found their thirst for knowledge refreshing. Although I have to admit, wearing the formal robes that school required took a little getting used to. I felt like I was wearing a dress. Maddie and I created one of our favorite memories when one night while the kids were away, she insisted that I wear a robe and nothing else to bed. Under the influence of more than a moderate amount of wine, pillow talk kept us in fits of laughter for years when we remembered it. I pulled a few strings to get Will some extra counseling, and it helped a lot. We still hit the bag, we still sparred, and sometimes we went to the shooting range at the local base and fired a few clips from the Makarov. The colonel invited us to skeet shooting, and although Will was good, my skills impressed them all. Just when I thought I had left my demons behind, they came upon me with a vengeance. I came home from school with a smile on my face, sparking a lively discussion among the children about different interpretations of the same historical event. I ended the lesson by reminding them that before the age of mass communication, only winners could be witnesses. My mood evaporated like dew in the Mojave as I looked at Maddie. What? She didn't say a word, just pointed at the TV. I pressed play and started watching. This was another broadcast of an execution by beheading. They appeared, and governments closed them down. 30 minutes later, they appeared again, routed through different servers. What made this broadcast remarkable was the sacrifice. It was a woman, one could tell by the rags that hung on her, not covering anything. The executioner went on his usual tirade before ripping off her mask. Here she is, the last of the S7. Justice is patient and rewards the faithful. His face was bruised, one eye was swollen and closed, and signs of beatings were obvious. It was Fatima. She disappeared after the bombing, and no one really looked for her. Maddie told me that her friends thought she was in Canada, living quietly among a group of immigrants from her homeland. It turned out, as we learned later, that one of the friends found out who she really was and immediately pointed her out for the reward. She was kidnapped, taken out of the country and halfway around the world to meet this fate. The executioner continued his tirade for several more minutes before Fatima spoke, so quietly that no one could hear her. He immediately stopped and asked her to repeat what she had said. She spoke quietly, and he leaned in to listen. This bitch wants to confess her sins. It won't help. Her fate is sealed, but maybe Allah will be merciful. What did you say, bitch? Speak up. He bent down again and Fatima pounced on him, biting his cheek and holding him like a bulldog until he was free. Look at this scar and remember, dog, even tied up, 7 can leave a mark on you. Your time will come, and then you will try to justify your actions. Allah Akbar. The executioner swung his scimitar in blind rage, but instead of a clean blow, it slid across the neck. At first I was in a daze. Then came the anger. I went out quietly, climbed into the hills, and stood on a rocky cliff, screaming until my voice was hoarse. Will found me 2 hours later, sitting with my feet dangling over the cliff, looking out over the wasteland. He didn't say a word, just sat down next to her and took out a flask. To your friend, may she rest in peace. He handed me the flask. For Fatima, may Allah smile on you. I took a sip. For Josh, one more sip. For Joe, I drank and called them by name. Emil said, Anatoly Sherry. For Moshe, may he find peace. I threw the empty flask over the cliff, watching as it bounced towards the bottom. I stood up, suddenly unsteady, but Will caught me. We walked back, and Will left me when the trail split at my house, heading towards Molly. I walked in, kissed Maddie like it was the last kiss I would ever give her, and hugged the children I considered mine tightly. I saw the worried looks on their faces. Sorry, kids. I just found out that someone close to me died suddenly. It affected me more than I thought. They circled me, Taddy sat on my lap and refused to move, and Joe awkwardly rubbed my shoulder before helping Maddie set the table. By evening, we were almost back to normal. We almost never watched TV, preferring to sit and talk about our day or read. Sometimes they would turn on the game console and everyone would take turns beating me at whatever game we were playing. We always kissed each other goodnight. Joe was a little standoffish at first, but soon he was kissing me on the cheek like it was the most normal thing in the world, saying, "Good night, Dad. Love you." He then waited for me to repeat this ritual before going to bed. Taddy was more emotional, kissed us on the lips and hugged us tightly. Then she would kiss her brother, usually teasing him by licking his cheek or something stupid, then run away laughing while he grumbled. Maddie and I made love twice that night. It wasn't easy for the couple in their early 50s. It was tender, emotional, and mentally satisfying. After the second time, we lay next to each other, hugging each other. When? Maddie asked. Soon. The lamp turned on and Maddie loomed over me, her breasts inches from my face. She grabbed my chin, forcing me to look at her. Listen to me, darling. I know this is important to you, so I won't try to stop you. But hear this. Come home as soon as you can. You gave me the life I dreamed of when I was younger, stuck in what hole in the middle of nowhere, not knowing if I'll come out alive. I'll kill everyone in the Middle East if I have to bring you home. But I'm no longer a warrior. I'm an ordinary housewife with 2 wonderful children and a man whom I love madly, despite his many faults. My plan is to keep you alive long enough to see our children grow up and settle down before I'll pump you to death. So go, but remember about us and what you have to come back. Then the woman I thought was the toughest person I had ever met collapsed onto my chest, sobbing quietly. I kissed and loved her until she fell asleep, still on my chest. I just held her, breathing in her scent, waiting for the sleep that never came that night. They visited me, warned me, and gave me instructions. It wasn't my fight, let her die, my family needed me, etc. I just smiled and agreed with everyone. Then I bought a burner phone and dialed a number I had remembered years ago. "Jihad," I said quietly. "Jihad," answered the voice on the other end. 4 days later, a private jet landed at the nearest airport and was waiting for me. I kissed the children, trying to make them understand. Because of their upbringing, they understood better than most what I was doing. Maddie drove me south and gave me an amazing kiss and a warning before she let me out of the car. "Come back. Do you hear me? Come back. If you die, I die too. So be careful and play it safe. The kids and I fully expect to see you soon." She drove off without looking back as I stood and watched until she disappeared around the bend. I was met at the plane by Sherry's father and brother, both sullen. We hugged, exchanged greetings, and climbed on board. You can't imagine my surprise when I saw Will already inside. He grinned. "What? You thought Maddie and Molly would just let you wander around on your own? I'm tasked with bringing you back safe and sound, so please don't kill us." We talked a lot during the flight and over the next week. I was amazed by the anger that the prince showed. "We intend to destroy them. When we're done, ISIS will be a very bad memory. People will wince and spit at the mention of their name. I assume you have a plan." "We have part of a plan. Perhaps you and your companion could help us complete it." To our surprise, Will served in the intelligence corps, reviewing strategic plans. His group was dedicated to identifying weaknesses in any plan and suggesting improvements. It turned out he was very good at his job. "Look," he said one night, "it's just not possible to kill them all. But you don't have to kill all the people, just destroy the group. Kill their leaders, cut their supply lines, destroy their communications, steal their funding, turn the population against them, and they will disappear like a bad dream. And when they become weak, attack them outnumbered." He was immediately tasked with destroying their infrastructure, and no idea was considered too crazy. Money was no object. They asked me what I wanted, and they gave me a team of wolves. Jamal was a thin man, about 5'4", and the most dangerous man I had ever met. He saw his parents killed, and he was beaten and bullied by enemies with tendencies. Odin was so fascinated by him that he decided to keep him as a concubine. He was beaten for 4 months until the opportunity presented itself, and he killed his master, and then went through the house with a knife and club until the whole party was dead. There were 5 other victims there, and they armed themselves and fought their way to freedom. Only Jamal and a young man named Mohammed survived. Jamal spent the next 8 years learning every possible way to kill another person. He could improvise poisons, gases, and explosive devices from everyday objects. A marksman with any weapon, he could achieve black belts in 5 types of martial arts if he wanted. He spoke 5 languages and dialects, could fit into any group, and always had at least 2 escape strategies. "How can I kill more of my enemies if I'm dead?" he said. In short, he was the perfect killing machine. Over time, I became something of a friend with Omar, but to Jamal, I was just a tool to achieve his goal. Mohammed was injured during their escape and had to walk with a cane. Unable to physically assist Jamal, he trained himself in computer science to the point where nothing stored on the computer was secure. The princes put it to very good use. He was appointed technical liaison for our group. There were 8 other people in my group, all seasoned killers with one common goal: to destroy ISIS. The princes have prepared another surprise for me. Will and I were taken to the desert, 50 miles from the nearest settlement. We approached a rock outcropping and were surprised to see a narrow path leading straight inside. There was a fairly large complex with 20 guys sitting at consoles. 12-inch stainless steel doors, walls and ceilings. Self-contained ventilation system with filters and scrubbers. 2 different escape plans that no one knows about, which will open if necessary. Satellite communications controlled by our satellite. Food and water supply for 8 months if things get really bad. Each of our employees is alone in this world. Their only family is each other. All are selected for one purpose: to destroy the enemy. Follow me, please. I turned around and saw Mohammed and Sherry's father smiling. We passed another room where about 10 people were intently manipulating joysticks. Our pilots, he said proudly. We walked into his office, a large, well-appointed room, and he ushered us to a conference table with a tablet in front of each seat. You know about drones, right? I nodded and pressed the controller, and we saw the hangar from the camera above. It was filled with planes. Some were quite small, but 5 were huge. Our personal air fleet, 30 of them, 5 for reconnaissance and surveillance only. The 5 largest can carry bombs. The rest are armed with missiles and airborne cannons. We have not used them yet, but the time is coming. I sat and thought about the cost of all this. It must have cost tens of millions. Apparently, the prince had a lot of money. He looked like he was reading my thoughts. Yes, it's expensive. Without going into too much detail, I'm not the only one funding this. There are other like-minded people who have reached their limit with these fanatics and want the most permanent solution possible. Now that you know what we can do, let me share information with you so you can help us chart a course of action. Will was overjoyed. We could do a lot of damage with them, but my first thought is they would be shot down by any of the 3, maybe 4 air forces operating in the area because they would perceive them as a threat. Mohammed had a grim expression on his face. Oh, we contacted them, and when we explained our mission, the countries were confused. When we explained that we had no interest in the politics of the area, we only had one goal: the destruction of the common enemy. Most agreed to leave us alone. One country that disagreed was gently warned that if they interfered with or shot down one of our drones, it would get very ugly. It remains to be seen what will happen if our drones and their aircraft get close to each other. We spent 3 days studying intelligence, deciding how best to harm the enemy. Will had the final say. Like I said before, destroy the infrastructure. The first step is to cut off their funding. It's hard to buy guns and ammo if you're broke. In my opinion, we shouldn't take credit for what we do. Fear and doubt can be very demoralizing, leaving them to wonder if any of their allies have betrayed them. Leave false trails vague enough to be impossible to confirm, but clear enough to make them doubt their friends. We decided, after some discussion, to start with 2 immediate plans. I contacted my old Kurdish friends, offering to supply them with the necessary equipment and a $5,000 bonus for every oil tanker they captured or destroyed. After 2 months, oil smuggling across the border into Turkey by ISIS has decreased by 75%. It was all arranged through intermediaries, so they didn't know who was behind the operation, but they were happy with the new weapons, and the money went to expand their war fund. While this was happening, I led my wolves in 3 raids. The first raid destroyed a large warehouse of equipment, mostly earth-moving machines, which they used to rob tombs and demolish buildings, selling the antiquities on the black market. They seemed to have learned a thing or two from a 7. A second raid, less than a day later, 500 miles away, destroyed the warehouse they were using to store items before selling them. I would like to say that we were able to save them, but this was not our task. However, I managed to save 2 truckloads of valuables. The third raid, in a different area a week later, was symbolic. We wanted to make a statement. My wolves and 2 other teams overran a small stronghold, capturing their leader and junior mufti, ardent supporters of their cause. Using their own equipment, we beheaded them live on the internet, but not before I warned the enemy that this would be the first of many such acts. The response was huge. It hit every major media outlet in the world. Every country involved in the region has denied involvement, using it to their advantage. My group was lucky, although the luck was reinforced by a large amount of money distributed through various channels. We captured the man who was effectively the 4th most powerful person in their financial system, and after a little gentle persuasion, he spoke. He was a strong guy, Even after he lost an eye and an ear, he was silent. It was only when we showed him the video of his family being captured that he broke down. After 3 days, we had squeezed all the information we could out of him, and Jamal took him into the desert, returning alone. I said nothing. This man was just a money bag, but he gave us account numbers and passwords that allowed us to cause significant damage. Mohammed and his team dug as deep as they could, and one thing led to another until we had a pretty good understanding of their cash flow. Small accounts were emptied, money transferred to the accounts of some enemies and even more allies, leaving enough information that it could be traced. Tensions grew, and when we came across one account that had over $3 million in it, we took it, publicly donating the money on their behalf to a group that fought for women's rights to a better future and educational opportunities. To make this even better, Mohammed used voice recognition equipment, selecting the right words and stringing them together so they sounded like natural speech, and overlaid it with a recent speech from the third in command of the Syrian department. In it, he personally apologized for his role in how women are perceived and treated, promising to change his organization to be more inclusive and caring. They immediately demanded the money back, of course, and the organization suggested they file a lawsuit with the International Court of Justice. Of course, since the International Court is in Europe and they would have to appear there in person, the protest quickly died down. 3 months passed, and I was making video calls home from what I called the fortress at least once a month. It hurt at first, seeing my family and not being with them, but we got used to it, and while I seemed unharmed, Maddie remained cheerful. Will called us all together for a meeting, his voice filled with excitement. I got the idea, believe it or not, from a science fiction novel I was reading. You all know the situation in Smyrna, right? We nodded. A village under the control of ISIS, completely cut off from the outside world. The city was almost destroyed by airstrikes by its own government and the air force of another country. People died from hunger, disease. They were shot at random to keep them in subjection. When Will laid out his plan, we all smiled. This might work. 3 nights later, our 5 bombers took off, followed by our 5 fighters. Each bomber carried 5,000 pounds of food and medical supplies, which we dropped into the city, ensuring that every part of the city received the cargo. I know it wasn't much, and the enemy probably got a good portion of it, but we were making a statement. It was all over the international news, speculation about who was behind it. 2 days later, we dropped another load, and the next day another. The foreign air force that was bombing the city sent 2 fighters to intercept us, demanding that we turn around or be shot down. Their radar showed that they were in the crosshairs of 5 new aircraft. A warning broadcast in their language to leave us alone was sent. Realizing that they were outnumbered, they turned around. On the next flight, instead of dropping food, we dropped leaflets saying that in order to continue the flights, we must see the bodies of at least 10 ISIS fighters lying in the desert. Until then, there will be no help. In case of failure, the next delivery will be made in 2 weeks in the form of bombs. To give them an example, we dropped bombs on the outskirts of the city, hitting the enemy command post. We also said that another batch would be dropped tomorrow to help them. We dropped parcels, each containing some food and weapons, mostly pistols. We then did nothing for 8 days, using one of the reconnaissance drones to monitor the situation. At dawn on the 9th day, 15 bodies appeared in the desert, lying in a row, face up. Facial recognition software confirmed that at least 3 of them were known ISIS members. We dropped 2 loads of supplies the next night. A week later, 20 bodies lay in the sand. I chalked it up to Jamal and Omar, who did a halo drop 10 days ago. 2 days later, our reconnaissance drones detected a fierce battle, and we scrambled our fighters and 2 bombers. As the terrorists tried to escape, fighter jets began strafing, destroying every organized escape attempt. Finally, our fighters retreated, and the small convoy escaped from the city at high speed. 4 SUVs, 2 Humvees, and 2 large trucks. The bombers circled, allowing them to leave the city, then dropped their payload. Each bomber carried 2 500-pound bombs, which they dropped from high altitude. As the bombs were released, they broke up into 10 250-pound bombs and then into 25-pound units. 2 out of every 4 bombs were fragmentation bombs, 1 was an incendiary bomb, and the last was either a smoke bomb or a delayed explosion bomb, burrowing into the ground and exploding 2 to 20 hours later. When they hit, they covered an area about 4 football fields, with a bomb falling every 3 square yards. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing more than a basketball left on the ground. Another bomber flew over the city immediately after the bombing, dropping leaflets warning people to stay off the road for at least 2 days, and that supplies would be delivered within 24 hours. The next day, a 26 transport convoy appeared, only to be stopped within sight of the city by national troops. The city was largely ignored by the regime in power, with larger battles to decide. But when the city actually became free after asking for their help for over a year, they decided to intervene. I talked to the major, the senior officer there. "I'm afraid we must confiscate your vehicles. Don't worry, we will ensure supplies arrive properly." He winked at me, and I was sure that if we handed the convoy over to him, he would quickly send it to his troops. "I don't think so, Major. These supplies are desperately needed and were promised to this city by my superior. He doesn't like disappointment, so please clear the way and we will continue on our way." The man stared at me, stunned that anyone would dare stand up to him. "Get your people out of these trucks now. No more discussion. If you don't, we will remove their dead bodies one by one." "Wrong answer, Major. Look at your shirt." He automatically looked down to see 3 different red dots covering the central mass. He turned a little pale, but looked stubborn. I raised my hand. "Please allow me to demonstrate what will happen if you continue to blockade us. Remember the footage of your enemies attempting to retreat from this city. Look at the cabin on the hill." When he looked up, the hut seemed to evaporate, thunder echoing across the desert seconds later. "Perhaps this will get your attention if that demonstration wasn't enough." 2 fighter drones descended from the sky, leaving twin 20M rounds 20 yards from each side of the convoy. "Now I'm going to politely ask you to clear the road once again. You can even accompany us to show the residents that their government cares." This was the exit he was looking for, and they quickly formed in front of us and behind us. We quickly found the remaining leaders of the city, giving them warning trucks. "These supplies are for all of your people, okay? No cover, no favoritism, or there will be no more supplies. We have observers, so we'll know if you try to use food and medicine as a political weapon." They agreed immediately, and I kept Omar and Jamal there for a few weeks to make sure the instructions were followed. State troops immediately ordered the city to surrender all its weapons, but my agents did their job well, and only 1/10 of the weapons were surrendered. 2 weeks later, the major declared martial law and attempted to blackmail the city into surrendering most of their wealth. He was killed 12 hours later. The captain, left in command, quickly ordered his troops to evacuate, sending a message to the command that the city was now under control and no longer needed their help. We targeted another town and village in similar conditions, dropping food and weapons in exchange for terrorist bodies. Both operations were successful, and the regime began to grow nervous, as did the foreign power supporting them. They intensified bombings and raids on cities they felt were getting out of control, further alienating the population. The small uprising soon turned into a full-scale civil war. Our group tried not to interfere in the politics of the region, but inevitably we were drawn into it. When the reward was announced, and it became known that my organization was paying out $1,000 for every confirmed ISIS kill, bodies started popping up everywhere. One village managed to capture an entire squad of ISIS soldiers, 35 people, and filmed their execution. One elder smiled at the camera, inviting ISIS to return, saying the village could use the money. I sent 2 teams of my wolves and 5 truckloads of weapons to repel the inevitable attack that the enemy had to make to save face. After all, if people stop being afraid, that defeats the purpose of being a terrorist, doesn't it? We watched them sneak through the night, thanks to our drones using infrared technology, 50 in total. Weapons mainly consisted of AK-47s and RPGs, although we spotted one mortar gun mounted on a nearby hill. Apparently, they were planning to attack before dawn, traditionally the best time, when the night guards are sleepy and the day guards are not yet fully awake. We watched them take up positions, then attacked. The drones first destroyed the mortar team, literally blowing up the top of the hill. Two fighters made strafing attacks on the most concentrated groups, and unfortunately, one was shot down by an RPG, pure luck on their part. Still dazed by the sudden attack, they were no match for the 100-plus villagers and our two teams, and it was all over in less than 30 minutes. 10 were captured alive, including the leader. We gave the elders a $10,000 bonus for it, and the teams took it with them when they left. All this was broadcast live before the execution of the survivors. A new era of war has arrived. The international press went crazy trying to figure out who we were. The governments, despite our assurances that we were not interested in their policies other than how they interacted with our enemy, were still very concerned. We'll call a meeting. Okay, time to go public. Not full disclosure, but enough so they have an idea who they're dealing with. Major, will you do an interview? It took 3 hours of debate, but in the end I agreed. Mohammed contacted two journalists, one French, the other American, who agreed to the terms of the interview. They were met at the Oman airport, pumped with substances, and taken to the interview site. It was actually only 30 minutes away, but we drove them around in the van for 6 hours before we brought them to the warehouse where the interview took place. We had our own team of videographers, lighting technicians, and sound engineers. As soon as they came to their senses, we started. They saw a man of average height, dressed in a military uniform with a traditional Arabic headdress and robe over them, with a mask hiding his face. I spoke Farsi through an interpreter to further conceal my identity. Who you are is the inevitable first question. We are just a group of people who have individually suffered greatly at the hands of ISIS. They are just bandits calling themselves holy warriors, and their atrocities must end. Our group is dedicated to eliminating them as a threat to the way of life in every country they are in. They are not holy warriors, simply opportunists greedy for power and wealth. Many countries now see you as a threat that will destabilize the political balance in the region. How will you respond to this? We are not at all interested in the politics of this region. Do you want us to leave? Drive out ISIS? We will quietly disappear like a memory. The Frenchman laughed. Easier said than done. Some people really believe in ISIS. How do you respond to them? I repeat again, we are not interested in politics, but if you declare your country a safe haven for them, we will come for you. Our group does not recognize borders, does not respect treaties between governments. Politics will not provide you with security. That should put you in terrible danger if governments start interfering. We are in terrible danger from the very beginning. Governments should mind their own business. We have no agenda for them. Leave us alone and let us do our job. After a few more meaningless questions and a few that mattered, we ended the interview by giving them the opportunity to ask one last question. They were the same. Who are you? I shed my traditional robe, revealing my military uniform with a large patch on the sleeve. 7 stood out brightly in red. We are the sons of a 7. Teachers, scholars, historians, and warriors who came together out of a desire to preserve the past. They were never political, but they were persecuted and executed for daring to humiliate their enemies. For every terrorist we kill, for every power base we destroy, they rejoice in their afterlife. I'm sure the killing of innocent scientists was the beginning of this. I hope that when their dreams die and their lives fade, they regret their decision to make them public examples. I added the last comment. Please know that even if we are exposed, even if funding stops and governments follow us, we will not turn away from our path. We watched the interview in our fortress. Will was amazed. Geez, Major, you look as big a fanatic as they come. Well, that's what I planned. That's all they understand. Now they know we're serious, and maybe they'll make mistakes or get careless. What they did was offer $1 million on my head, preferably still alive, even though they didn't know who I was. We expanded our activities by targeting Hezbollah and Al-Qaeda targets, leaving false trails leading back to ISIS. Trust between the groups was minimal at best, and these actions put a lot of strain on the entire relationship. Security around the leaders increased, making it impossible to reach them. I once joked to Omar that it was a pity that the Ismailis no longer existed. We could use a few skilled killers. He simply smiled and connected me with a man, which led to other meetings, and 2 months later I met two men in the desert, alone, carrying only a small bag. They gave me tea with a sedative, and soon I fell asleep. I didn't know how long it lasted, minutes, hours, it was impossible to say. I was tied up in the back of a truck that bounced around for another 4 hours. We stopped, and they carefully set me on my feet, leading me inside the building and up the steep stairs into a large room. There my restrictions were lifted gently, and I was asked to wait. 30 minutes later, 3 men came in, wrapped from head to toe, their faces hidden. This is how I met the Old Man of the Mountains, a title given to every leader of the Assassin's Guild since their founding almost 2,000 years ago. They survived by remaining in the shadows, sometimes selling their services. They have adapted and evolved over the centuries, using their intelligence and cunning to survive. No longer peasant mountain folk, many were highly educated in fields ranging from computer science to diplomacy, still merciless and willing to die to fulfill the contract. They were well prepared and knew exactly who I was. What I wanted wasn't cheap, but the benefits of having millions at your disposal made it easily achievable. My gift, the head of one of their greatest enemies, greatly contributed to the establishment of rapport with the leader. Later, I wondered how the ISIS commander would react when he woke up and saw his 2 sons dead with the S7 brand on their foreheads. What it did was bring our war out of the shadows. The reward for my capture has been increased to 5 million, and for my confirmed death to 2. We still weren't too worried because they still didn't know who we were. If there was the slightest suspicion that you knew anything about 7, you were detained, tortured, and killed. Between this, offers of money, and the desire of some for the war to end, information leaks occurred. I confess that success has made us arrogant. It was a carefully prepared ambush. The bait was a rumor that an important player was in the village. I took all 3 teams of wolves with me, thinking that would be enough. Our plan was to be in and out in minutes. None of us wore any insignia, but the enemy was smart enough to watch us and see who the people obeyed. I lost a third of my men in the first minutes of the battle. We regrouped and began a fighting retreat, trying to get as many people out as possible. Some, wounded and knowing that a terrible death awaited them in captivity, fulfilled our agreement. The treaty was an agreement between themselves. If captivity was inevitable and there was no hope of rescue, they had to end their lives themselves or ask their friends to help. I watched as Omar, with tears in his eyes, killed 2 of his friends. Jamal did this to 3 others. This allowed us to move faster, and we were almost out when another large group struck our flank. I was wounded, high on my right side. Run into the desert, we will find you. If not, go with Allah. Against my instincts, I pointed the bike west and rode until I ran out of gas. I saw no signs of life, but I knew that if I continued walking west, I would reach a village or town. I walked for 3 days before I collapsed from fatigue, injury, and lack of water. I lay on the dune under the scorching sun, hoping that death would come quickly. In my mind, I saw my family, Maddie, Joe, Taddy, my mother, Polly, and Fran. I would have cried, but there was no moisture for tears. The drones found me. I walked at night to save energy and hid during the day. When I passed out in the morning sun, 2 hours passed before the video of my body was sent to the fortress. Will and Omar, who somehow survived, landed 6 hours later. It took me almost 24 hours to wake up, in a comfortable bed in a cool room. As soon as the doctors deemed me fit, I called home, changed into my regular clothes, and got out of bed. Maddie was panicking. The enemy announced that they had killed me and most of the S7. When she saw my face, it took her 3 minutes to stop crying and start talking. Come home, dear. Let them have their little feuds. You have avenged your friends and family. The debt is paid. I promised her that I would return home soon. I don't know if it was an epiphany, hallucinations, heat, and lack of water, but every night I had companions walking along the dunes under the light of the full moon. First it was Joe from 25 years ago, shining in the moonlight, so beautiful it took my breath away. I tried to speak, but she gently placed her fingers on my lips. It's a beautiful night, honey. Let's just go for a walk. We did this for what seemed like hours while she held my hand. She suddenly stopped, looked at me, and smiled through the tears falling on her cheeks. It's time for me to go, darling. I will always love you, but you have others who depend on you now. Treat them with the kindness and love you have given me for so many years. She turned and walked across the top of the dune, shimmering until she disappeared into the distance. A couple of hours later, Josh appeared, smiling his goofy smile and walking next to me, humming a song from his childhood. He walked me into a shallow cave just before dawn, made sure I lay down, and left. The next night, Sherry emerged from the shadows, turned, said something over her shoulder, and was joined by Fatima. They took my hands and we walked while they sang children's songs to me in different languages, patiently waiting for me to get up after each of my many falls. At dawn, I came across a grove of bushes and lay down on the needles. I don't think I've ever felt such a comfortable bed. I felt their kisses on my cheeks as they disappeared. On the third night, I waited much longer to start my journey. First Anatoly appeared, then Emil, and said. They hugged and laughed as they followed me, singing lewd songs in 3 languages as I walked. They stood patiently the first 4 times I fell, waiting for me to get up. When I fell for the 5th time, they sat next to me, persuading me for a long time to get up. Emil left first, then said, and finally Anatoly. He didn't speak, but I knew he was asking. They are wonderful children, Anatoly. Taddy is becoming more beautiful every day, and Joseph is your copy. Maddie and I will give them a good life, my brother. You can rest in peace. He nodded once and disappeared. I lay there for some time. A pleasant numbness came over me when I heard laughter. Wondering who it was, I turned around. There stood the terrorist we killed so long ago. Enemies we killed in battle. Everyone had some kind of smile, waiting for me to die. Damn you, I wanted to scream, but it sounded like a wheeze. I will not give you this satisfaction. I rose to my feet and continued walking, hearing them behind me. I walked, fell, walked again until I couldn't get up anymore. Then I crawled. The sand was cool and pleasant to my hands. It became light, and I continued to crawl until there was nothing left in me. I was lying on top of the dune and could see behind me. There was nothing there. I felt a grim satisfaction that I had defeated them before I lost consciousness. I dreamed that Taddy was holding me by one hand, Joseph by the other, and Maddie was trying to lift me by the collar. Pete, wake up. You need to get home. I struggled to get up and saw Will and Omar smiling at me, wondering where they had come from. Maddie was right. The rage that had consumed me faded. In many places ISIS was becoming a joke. Will printed and distributed leaflets over many towns and villages. These were wanted posters with images of the top of their movement, with rewards ranging from 1,000 for ordinary soldiers to 5 million for leaders, doubling if they were brought alive to a location indicated only by a text message from the number on the leaflets. Many, seeing the impending inevitability, turned against their leaders, selling out to raise enough money for a new life far away. The High Command began executing soldiers at the slightest hint of betrayal, which did not contribute to warm feelings. Sheikhs spent up to 200,000 a week in some areas. Other terrorist organizations, seeing a possible power vacuum, tried to intervene. The villagers, my wolves, and a growing number of the new Independence Army treated them harshly, threatening to put their faces on wanted posters alongside ISIS. The Saudis supported the rebels, supplying them with everything they needed against a regime they never supported. Their revenge sparked a movement they didn't expect, and there were many late-night discussions about what to do about it. Will disappeared for a while, returning with a huge smile and saying little. I felt more than heard the excitement. Mohammed led me to the command center, and we watched the activity around the small town through the screen. Soldiers. Lots of soldiers. Everyone looks fresh and clean in new uniforms, with modern weapons, moving with discipline and purpose. Syrian Independence Army. 15,000 in this group, and at least twice as many in training, and more arriving every day. Will was on the verge of exploding with pride. How did this happen? Well, it started with stories of villagers fighting against ISIS and their current government. They were all refugees, selected and trained for 4 months in a remote part of Hungary. We didn't get the exact permission, but we made enough contributions from locals and parts of the military so that they would leave us alone. Many of them are former soldiers, and we selected the leaders from among them. They seemed to be well trained. Yes, indeed. The princes hired the best. 2 ex-SAS officers and 3 sergeants, 3 Russian Special Forces officers, 2 retired Mossad operatives. 1 retired US colonel who specialized in counter-terrorist tactics, 1 retired Green Beret captain, 2 SEALs, a couple of long-range scouts, and 4 rangers. They learned to fight like demons, but to think at the same time, and never lose focus on the mission. And this is only the first batch of more ready to be released in 2 months. We are confident that we will not lack recruits. He picked up the controller and zoomed in on their uniforms. Modeled desert colors with sleeve badges. SLA, and underneath it is a small 7. Mohammed saw my gaze and smiled. Tribute to you and your group. It's all thanks to your work. I was stunned. That's not what I meant. But again, I didn't think much about what would happen. I was just full of revenge. Things went on for another 2 months, with the SLA selecting targets carefully, first liberating small towns on the outskirts of the fighting. Once the city was captured, the commanding officers gathered community leaders and formed a provisional government, leaving a small force and 1 officer in place. The officer hammered cooperation into them. You are not Sunnis, not Shiites, not Jews, and not Christians. You are first of all Syrians. Work together, live in peace and prosperity. The princes created an organization modeled after an African microcredit program that was very successful. Small loans were issued without interest and with very small payments to finance local businesses. One of the most successful businesses were construction companies, as there was always a lot of restoration work. Restaurants and coffee shops have returned to the streets. The first 2 major projects in any city are the restoration of hospitals and schools. And there was a strict rule that was never broken. Preach any doctrine you want, but if there was an attempt to seize power or terrorist activity, everything ended badly. There was a short trial, and then you were shot. Every time. They explained that the interim government could not afford to allocate resources to the prison and had no desire to do so. The current regime was becoming very nervous. They and their allies began bombing. This was a surprise on the first day, but on the second day, the zone was declared a no-fly zone and drones shot down anything that violated the airspace. By that time, our small air force had over 100 drones, so if we lost one, we ordered 2 more. Most times, the enemy pilots were not harmed. Using the technology we developed, the drone came out of stealth mode, sent a short but very powerful EMP pulse towards the enemy aircraft and hovered, while the aircraft, which had lost power, glided to the ground. Anyone who ejected was quickly picked up, taken to safety, and released. I was becoming increasingly frustrated with what I was doing. My intention was quite simple: to try to destroy the lives of those who harmed me and my friends, and not to participate in building an empire. And I almost succeeded. There was a joke about ISIS fighters and what they cost. An open season of sorts was declared, and it became a popular and profitable business. My injury reminded me of my aging reflexes and physical condition. I was already over 50, and the recovery time took much longer. The princes came to visit me while I was recovering. The elder smiled when he knew that I would be okay. Your jihad is over, isn't it, my brother? I see it in your eyes. You miss your family, and you should go back to them. We will continue to fight, you have our word. My daughter and your friends have been avenged many times over, but we will continue to punish our enemies. Go with Allah. I was grateful for his understanding. Their personal mufti visited me several times, quietly talking about spiritual and other topics. One night he cleared my mind after several cups of strong hibiscus tea, known for its mild mind-altering effects. Tell me, my son, when you go on these raids, who are you trying to kill? Most of the people you encounter don't remember 7. The elders who do remember are mostly dead. I think that perhaps you are doing all this to punish yourself for continuing to live and have a chance at happiness while your friends were killed. Your debt to them has been paid. Go home, leave this behind, and lead a good and productive life. Love your family, use your talents to raise your young, and while I don't want you to forget your path, don't get too caught up in it. Allah Akbar, my friend. That night, I dreamed that we were all sitting in our laboratory, discussing a new and exciting discovery. We were laughing and sharing drinks when Sherry looked at me. I speak for all of us, Pete. Thank you. Thank you for remembering us, for avenging our deaths. Most Westerners won't understand, but your soul is old, born in the desert. Remember us with love. After that, they lined up and kissed my cheeks, each one disappearing as the next one approached. Soon it was just me and Moshe, and he smiled at me. What? I am still alive. Go home, Pete. God bless. Will understood my decision and even looked a little relieved. Good decision, Major. I have to admit, I liked it in some ways, the opportunity to maybe change history. But like you, I've taken revenge on my friends, and I'm ready to leave. Omar was happy for me, oddly enough, and so was Jamal. It's good to see, my friend. Love them and remember your comrades from time to time. We were ready to leave when information arrived that a meeting was to take place with the participation of several important enemies of ours. It was too good to pass up, so we planned and prepared in detail and headed out for another battle. Security was tight, but we reconnoitered and moved like ghosts, taking out the guards with knives and silenced weapons. We had almost reached the inner circle when, after the guards failed to make contact, the enemy responded. It was a fierce battle, with heavy casualties on both sides, but in the end we captured the camp, capturing everyone. I was hit again. They brought to me a young man, a teenager, the grandson of the supreme leader. It was well known that this boy was the only grandson. His eyes filled with tears, his lips trembled, but he did not beg, even as he looked at the red-hot brand. It really bothered me that he looked so much like Joseph. I admired his courage as I stood before him with a scimitar in my hands. Tell me, if I had shown mercy and let you live, would it have changed anything? Would you give up your ways, promise me that you would live a quiet, productive life? What can you promise me that would convince me to change my mind and stop your execution? He looked at me from his knees, at the scimitar, at the red-hot brand. I don't like fighting. I do this because I have to. If they had left me alone, I would be at university now, studying agriculture, trying to find ways to make the desert flourish, to help my people. But I didn't have that life. I became who I am now. If I could give you this chance, would you take it? Would you live in peace and not in war? I would take it and never look back. But we both know that this will never happen, and I believe that it is more cruel than my death to torture me in this way. I'm ready, do it. Allah Akbar. I smiled, happy with the decision I had just made. Yes, Allah is good, and in some cases he can be merciful. Pull out his hand. They pulled his hand out, holding his palm open. Before he could react, I pressed the brand into his palm, permanently burning the S7 into it. He didn't scream, but he did scream before he lost consciousness. I dropped the stigma, ending this life forever. Treat his wound. Place him in handcuffs and send him to the fortress. I have plans for him. We faked his death by filming it. I spoke on video, addressing his grandfather. Everything is over. The last male member of your family has met Allah. I ended your line, erased your bad seed from this earth. It will be your turn soon. This is my last message. My work is finished. I sent word to the old man of the mountain. It's time to fulfill his contract. 6 weeks later, while I was at home, I saw a news bulletin that ISIS headquarters had been attacked, with 43 confirmed kills, including their chief mufti and supreme military leader. No group claimed responsibility. We took our grandson out of the country, gave him a new identity, and enrolled him in a college in the United States known for its cutting-edge advancements in agriculture. I did not communicate with him again until after his release, sending a check and a note. Take the money and create an experimental farm in your home country. Make sure I don't spare you in vain. 7. He did as I asked and soon became known as one of the leading experts on regional agriculture in the country. He almost always wore a glove on his left hand, telling people that he had been badly burned as a child and that, in addition to the deformity, his hand needed support. Will and I returned home to a warm welcome from our families. Molly decided to stop taking birth control while Will was away. We were pretty sure they conceived the first night he returned. Maddie and I didn't have children, but we made love as soon as we could get the kids away from me. Taddy became an adult while I was away, and I was immensely glad that I had a weapon. Joseph grew sharply, becoming an inch taller than me, with broad shoulders. He became a copy of Anatoly, but still called me Dad. With his height, shape, black hair that constantly fell into his eyes, and charming smile, little girls were constantly under our feet, not to mention the boys trying to woo Taddy. We decided to stay in our quiet Scottish town. This was our children's home, and we didn't want to disturb it. I was warmly received by the residents. The official version was that I had accepted a consulting job that I could not refuse. I continued to teach at the boarding school. When my work started showing up among college-bound kids, several universities tried to lure me away, but I declined, preferring my home. Sometimes I had nightmares about my past life, but Maddie was there to calm me down, and they became less and less frequent. 5 years later, I was sitting by a lake in California. We kept the house by the lake and went to see it for the first time since my return. It was not our home, but it was very pleasant, and we got into the habit of spending a month there every summer. The locals loved our accents, especially the kids, and with their good looks, they soon made many summer friends that they met every year. This year, we came to settle Taddy in a new home in a nearby college dormitory, where she was studying for an MBA while pursuing a bachelor's degree in Cambridge. She has already been sought out by several international companies, especially the one where she did her internship last summer. The fact that she spoke Russian, Farsi, German, Arabic, and French made a great impression on them. She seemed fascinated by languages and found teachers in Maddie and me. Joseph showed an affinity for engineering and still had a year left to complete his bachelor's degree at Edinburgh, after which he would head to Stanford for his master's degree. Maddie was eager for them both to start their lives and produce grandchildren while we could still enjoy them. We were both over 60 and in good health, so I was patient. I was sitting enjoying the sun when a woman walked up to my seat, shielding her eyes from the sun, looking into the distance. "Hello, Father." I looked and was shocked to see Polly. Now in middle age, she was still slim and attractive, well preserved for her years. "How?" "Maddie told me last year. I was so angry at you, Dad, for leaving us like that, making us think you were dead. But I finally understood. We were in danger while you were alive, and you couldn't bear it, especially after Josh. So I forgave you, and Fran forgave too. You know, we always wondered where the mysterious Christmas and birthday gifts came from, even for our children and husbands. I think Jack might have suspected, but he never said a word. You went to your grandmother's funeral, didn't you? We wondered who the man with Maddie was, but you never came or spoke. We saw your tears and asked Maddie later. She said that you were someone from the past who always thought highly of her and was saddened by her passing." She paused, thinking. "You didn't go to Grandpa's funeral, did you? If it makes it any easier, he was a broken man at the end, barely tolerated by his family. Grandma moved into the guest bedroom right after you died. I don't think they ever slept together again." She finally fell silent, sitting down next to me on the bench. Finally, I was able to speak. "You know, I never stopped loving you girls, right? But I couldn't tell you. Too many have already died because of me. I could not bear the weight of your deaths on my soul. So I stayed dead. You have no idea how hard it was for me to miss the birth of my grandchildren, not to be able to comfort Fran when her marriage ended, or rejoice when she found a better man. I absorbed every drop of information about you, rejoicing in your successes, tormented by any of your failures. Tell me, what do you want? We want our father back, Fran said from behind us. You need to establish relationships with your grandchildren. You need daughters who need this too. The past is over. No one will notice that we have struck up a friendship with an old friend's husband. The whole family is here, Dad, at the house. Jack, Ben, my new husband, all 5 of your grandchildren. They've all met Maddie and can't wait to meet you. Now hug your girls, Daddy, and let go of the past. We must have stood there crying and hugging for about 10 minutes before someone cleared their throat. I looked up and saw Maddie with tears in her eyes, and I grabbed her, pulling her into a group hug where she started having real waterfalls. When we finally calmed down, we walked back to the cabin where I first met my grandchildren. Jack was there, standing in the background, and it wasn't until late that evening that I was able to talk to him. Maddie told me that after he was medically discharged from the Army, he was quickly recruited by the State Department to work at a think tank in Washington. He chuckled. Well, you went out in a big way, didn't you? Twice. Oh, don't be surprised. We've heard rumors about you off and on for years, and your little adventure in Syria didn't turn out quite the way you planned, did it? You were able to tear the country apart. Governments around the world are trying to get a piece of the new pie, but they seem to be really close with the Saudis now. Maybe you have someone to whom you can give kind words. Perhaps this will help stabilize the region. I took a sip of the beer I was holding. Damn, Jack, this is easy. You, Russia, the Saudis, Iran, France, Turkey, Israel must leave and stay out. Everything would have been settled decades ago if you had not interfered. Instead, you turned it into a generational war. Let them figure it out for themselves and respect the winner. Impeccable logic, Major, which will never be followed in our lifetime. I sighed. Well, Jack, that's all. But give this warning to everyone. One day there will be a leader, good or bad, who will unite the people, and none of you will probably be happy about it. He won't ask you to leave. He will actively look for ways to throw you away. Wise advice, but again advice that no one will accept. Changing the subject, I would like to come and meet your friend Will soon. He has the kind of out-of-the-box thinking that we are looking for. I laughed thinking about Will. He and Molly now have 4 children. They bought a big house next to ours, and my children now looked after it when we wanted to go out for the evening. The princes paid us both quite handsomely for our efforts and refused to take no for an answer. We were both worth several million euros, so our futures were secure. It will take a lot of talking to convince Will and Molly to move, especially since Molly left the service and worked in a private clinic for a very good salary. Surprising us all, Will felt the call and went to seminary, becoming the pastor of our local church. He was very effective in ministering to the needs of his flock, and was adored by all except 2 men who beat their wives and children. He prayed for them, with them, and then beat the sense out of them. I held his coat. We met again at Christmas, where I gave Ben and both of my male grandchildren sapphire rings like the one I ordered for Josh, and that Joseph wore. Taddy had a very beautiful emerald necklace, which she was allowed to wear only on special occasions. My 3 granddaughters admired it and squealed with delight when she and Maddie helped them with theirs. It became a habit. We spent a month at the lake house with the whole family in the summer. They came to us for Easter, and we flew to them for Christmas. 10 years later, I found myself in Cleveland to visit an old friend. Maddie followed Mike, and it was a sad story. He was dying, alone, from liver disease due to excessive alcohol consumption. Of course, he didn't recognize me. Almost 2 decades have passed, and I have changed a lot. I now wore a neatly trimmed beard, and it was as silver as my hair. When I told him who I was, he didn't believe me until I told him a few stories of our childhood that only I knew. He went from apathy to rage in seconds. I let him scream until he collapsed back onto the pillow, gasping for breath. Feel better? I guess in some ways I deserved it, but it was you and Joe and my dad that caused this whole mess. Now Joe is gone, blown up. My father died alone and friendless. His last years were miserable. But look what happened to you. Part of a man replaying his glory days, real and imagined. Every sin you ever committed came back to you that day in the tombs. I could have easily let them kill you, but I wanted you to suffer for years. And you suffered. Am I happy about this? Yes, for many years. Now I just feel sad. Things could have been better if you hadn't decided to manipulate me. I wasn't in this alone, you know. We were just trying to protect you. We knew that you did not have the strength to make difficult decisions or withstand the trials of battle. I calmly stood up and took off my shirt, pushing my hair behind my left ear, showing him the hole left by the bullet. Scars from an improvised explosive device. 2 stab wounds, 6 bullet holes. And this does not count those that were removed during reconstructive operations. How many scars do you have? As far as I know, not one. Still think I couldn't handle it? I buttoned and tucked in my shirt before sitting back down. He refused to look at me. I sighed. Look, I didn't come here to argue about the past. I have come today to offer you forgiveness. I will forgive you. I will take you to a private clinic that will make your last days as comfortable as possible. Or, I said, looking at the charity department we were in, I'll leave you here if that's your decision. He screamed and raged until the nurse asked me to leave. I stood up, looking down at him. I'm sorry, Mikey. I wish our lives had turned out differently. I left without saying another word, heading towards the manager. Here, this is a check for $10,000 for your business. All I ask is that you make it as comfortable as possible. Buy him his favorite food, give him extra blankets, whatever he needs. If he is alive in 3 months, I will send more. The sister looked at the check and smiled. We will do everything possible. You must love him very much. I shrugged, standing up. I loved it when I was young. God bless you, sister. I left and never looked back. He died 6 weeks later, and I paid for the funeral. Maddie and I were in attendance, along with about 10 other people, most of whom were old drinking buddies. They wanted to know who we were, so I told them that we grew up together. He was a funny guy, one of them said. He was always telling some wild stories about being a spy and secret agent for the government, all sorts of nonsense. Maddie squeezed my hand tighter. Well, let's hope he's at peace now. It was nice meeting you. We left without even attending the wake we paid for. I'm almost 80 years old, and I feel the tick-tock of the clock getting louder. Maddie passed away last year, and I miss her more every day. She whispered to me before she died that she was grateful to me for the life I gave her. Taddy, Joseph, their spouses and children, Polly, Fran, Jack, Ben and their children and little grandchildren were all there. Many mourned, everyone loved Grandma. Will led the service, breaking into tears twice before he finished, and her grandchildren carried her coffin to the horse-drawn hearse, which we followed into the cemetery, followed by the entire village and many others. The children stayed for a while, but they had their own lives scattered all over the world, so I sent them home after 2 weeks. They only left because Molly and Will promised to take care of me. I spent 2 weeks reviewing our lives, sorting through memorabilia from our shared and separate adventures, marking them so the children knew who got what. Moshe and Ruth arrived, surprising me. When I was making rings and necklaces for our grandchildren, I went to Israel and decided to surprise him. He opened the door and my first thought was, damn, he looks old. It took 2 minutes to convince him that it was really me. Then he pulled me into the house and hugged me so tightly that I thought I would crack a rib, and then Ruth began to hug me with equal force. I told them a little about my life after 7. He smiled and said that he knew I was alive. He realized it when he saw the video, telling Ruth that it could only be me. We kept in touch via the internet and by phone, and they visited us one winter, wanting to see real snow. Although I didn't tell anyone, I kept 2 truckloads of stolen antiques from one of our first raids, always intending to dismantle them. I finally decided it was time and examined the packaging and artwork, deciding to send most of them to their rightful owners. Having found 3 Ismaili daggers, I carefully packed them and sent them home. I received an online thank you and a promise of a favor if I was ever needed. I kept a few trinkets to give to my children and grandchildren, even my 3 great-grandchildren. There were 2 barrels, covered with leather and soaked in oil to survive the ravages of time. I opened one and saw stacks of scrolls, so fragile that one crumbled when touched. I was aware of the latest developments in my field and knew who to pass them on to. This will be my last gift to the world. The professor watched the video for the 5th time, looking for some clues. The man was clearly old or a very talented actor, and he was leaning towards the first option. He noticed that the man was dressed like someone from an Indiana Jones movie, with a wide-brimmed hat covering his face. They saw a white beard, but it could also be fake. He watched as the rental van pulled up, and the old man got out and approached the 2 students. Money changed hands and students followed instructions to wait until the car was out of sight before moving the boxes to the reception area. They later interviewed students but received little information. It was an old man, a professor. He spoke with a British accent and asked if we wanted to make $100 each just by moving the boxes into the building. It's like we gave up $100. He made us promise to wait until he was out of sight, saying it was a surprise that you would enjoy. And yes, he asked you by name. The van turned out to be a dead end, rented with a false ID, and all they remembered was the sweet old man. He paid, and the money went through, so they had no claims against him. The professor almost collapsed when they opened the boxes and saw the barrels. He called all the necessary people, and they carefully examined them, determining from tests that they were at least 2,000 years old. They locked them in storage until they could set up the machine. The machine cost the university nearly $500,000, but the technology allowed it to read a scroll through a barrel, an urn, even a metal box, even if it was rolled up. When they were ready, they placed the barrel inside and started the program. This must have taken at least 10 to 14 hours, so everyone went home except for the 3 armed guards. His wife met him at the door. She had a strange expression on her face. "Someone called you, dear. He said to tell him it's an old man with boxes, and you should check your email." He rushed into his office, his wife following him. He told her the short version of the story as he scrolled through the messages. I quickly found one with the title "Man with a Box" and opened it. "Dear Professor, you don't know me, but I'm a big fan of your work. So when I decided to pass on the barrels, you were the first person I thought of. I give them to you freely and free of charge. I don't know where they came from, and no one could tell me. I kept them for years until I decided to unburden my life, and now I'm putting the burden of discovery on you. I give you one piece of advice as someone who has been in your shoes. Be very careful. Knowledge can be a great joy, but it can also be a greater burden, and the law of unintended consequences is never more evident than in situations like these. Good luck, and may God be with you." The professor barely slept, and at 5 in the morning he gave up, got up, took a shower, and enjoyed a light breakfast of yogurt and fruit, although he wanted bacon and eggs. Unable to wait, he was in the lab by 7, not particularly surprised to see that most of his team was already waiting. Looking at their faces, he assumed that they too had hardly slept. He carefully locked the door behind the team and booted up the computer. As soon as the translations started appearing, all movement stopped and the team stared at the screen in fascination. By the 3rd page, there were tears in his eyes, and by the middle of the 4th, the professor heard a thud and turned to see one of his assistants on the floor, passed out. He immediately turned off the screen while the others helped their fallen colleague and directed everyone to the conference room. Everyone got coffee and water and took a few minutes to calm down. Finally, the man who had fainted looked at their leader. "What are we going to do now, Professor?" A massive manhunt was launched for the man with the box, but they soon ran into dead ends. The call was traced to the university library, as was the email. There was no record of the man other than from the car rental company, and no sign of him entering or leaving the country on any commercial airliner. He was a ghost, appearing and disappearing like the mist in a valley. Jack hugged Polly, who cried as she watched the coffin being lowered into the grave. There was a lot of controversy about the tombstone, but in the end they decided to reveal the truth, since now there was no one to harm. Taddy and Joseph, Fran and her husband, and all their families were also present, each coping with grief in their own way. The whole village had gathered again, and there were strange guests. Two Saudi princes with their families, an Israeli woman, quite elderly, and several military men in business suits. There was also a group of Catholic priests, 5 in total. One, a large man with red hair streaked with gray, was crying openly. All the children he taught over the years who were able to attend were there with their families to honor a man who had impacted their lives in varying degrees. The woman and the Saudi princes had watched the day before as Jack examined the body before placing 2 scimitars, an antique dagger, and 2 well-used Makarov pistols into the coffin. They nodded in approval as the weapon was placed. Ruth touched the old face, saying a small prayer in Hebrew before leaving. She only wished that her husband was still alive to pay her respects. Jack smiled, remembering part of the service. The pastor, an old friend, spoke eloquently of his friend's virtues as a good father, husband, and companion, a man who could be absolutely relied upon in good times and bad. He was a teacher, a warrior, a devoted friend, and an implacable enemy. His greatest accomplishments, as he often told me, were his children and the children he taught, despite the many things he did that changed the course of history to some extent. They, as he often said, were his legacy. Everything else he achieved was trivial in comparison. We knew him as Major Mark Jones, but his real name was Professor Jacob Peter Trammell, the last of his 7. There was a collective gasp from the villagers who realized that such a person lived among them. It took a long time for them to come to terms with the man they knew and the legacy he left behind. Finally, to honor his memory, they erected a huge monument, 12 feet high, at the entrance to the cemetery. At the top was a large A7 sign in a circle. The inscription read, "Here lies Jacob Peter Trammell and his wife Madison, Major and his general, together for eternity." On the way back home, Jack read the London Times, which he bought at the airport while Polly dozed. He could hardly contain his laughter. Discovered scrolls can change history. A worldwide hunt is announced for the man with a box. End. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.